Hello and welcome to a special edition of Primetime News. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Tae-ri. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. 2014 is already coming to an end tonight, and we'll be ringing in a brand new year in just about 2 hours from now.
That's right. And to stay with us right here on Arirang TV, we would like for you to say goodbye with us and celebrate the start of 2015 together. Part 1 is now until 11 p.m. where we cover the news, and Part 2 with our special musical guests and other segments will start at 11 and go until 12:30 a.m. So we'll be here with you for the next 2.5 hours.
Exactly. We got the whole package tonight. But first, we will get you covered with today's headlines. And we begin this hour with the latest on the missing AirAsia passenger jet. Officials now are trying to recover more debris as large parts of the plane have been spotted at the bottom of the Java Sea using sonar technology.
Indonesia's chief of search and rescue said Wednesday the recovery operation has been delayed due to low visibility, but also stormy weather and high tides. So far, 7 bodies have been found in the main search zone off the coast of Borneo, including one crew member who was wearing an AirAsia Flight attendant uniform. In order to speed up the ID process, authorities have been gathering DNA samples and photographs from victims' relatives. Investigators are trying to figure out why the plane suddenly lost contact on Sunday morning without any prior distress call. So along with the bodies of some 160 people on board, authorities are looking for the black box recorders. A public memorial is planned to be held in Surabaya this evening local time to pray for the victims and their families.
And ringing in a new year, South Korean President Park Geun-hye reached out to the Korean people on YouTube and Facebook on this Wednesday for her New Year's message.
And she spent most of it talking about 2 things, the economy and North Korea. Our Ji Myung-gil has more.
President Park Geun-hye started off her New Year's address wishing all Koreans a healthy and happy 2015 in the year of the sheep. She said her top priority over the coming year was reinvigorating the economy.
창의와 혁신의 기반을 둔 경제로 체질을 바꿔가면서 국민소득 4만 불 시대를 여는 기반을 다져가겠습니다.
President Park also addressed national security matters, promising to open an era of unification for the 2 Koreas.
단절과 갈등의 분단 70년을 마감하고 신뢰와 변화로 북한을 이끌어내서 실질적이고 구체적인 통일 기반을 구축하고 통일의 길을 열어갈 것입니다.
She also promised to root out irregularities in society to make Korea a safer place to live. President Park said due to the spirit of the Korean people, she was confident that Korea will be able to overcome any difficulty or challenge in the new year. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
U.S. security experts investigating the recent cyber attack on Sony Pictures say North Korea might be innocent after all.
Cyber intelligence firm Norse Corporation claims that 6 disgruntled former Sony employees could have hacked into the company's network. The firm says it did not find any evidence that North Korea was behind this attack. Norse is not part of the official FBI investigation, but the firm briefed the government on Monday. The U.S. State Department, however, is sticking to the FBI's findings that Pyongyang is responsible for the attack. Now, for the latest in the nut rage incident, the former vice president of Korean Air has been taken into custody now on charges of violating aviation safety laws, coercion, and impeding crew in their duties in the now infamous nut rage incident.
The 40-year-old heiress to the nation's flagship air carrier stands accused of ordering a plane to turn back on the runway in New York in order to kick the chief steward off the flight after she was incorrectly served a bag of nuts.
Now, those are the top headlines of the last day of 2014 for us. And let's get ready to say goodbye to 2014 and say hello to a brand new year, 2015. And to do that, we're going to check out the biggest New Year's Eve event in Seoul.
And that would be the traditional Bosingak Pavilion bell ringing ceremony. And that's exactly where our Kwon So-ah is standing by for us tonight. So a happy new year.
Happy New Year, guys. Now I'm here at one of the places to be on New Year's Eve. Around 100,000 people are expected to be here tonight to be part of this big event. It's around -5 degrees Celsius here tonight, but the cold doesn't seem to matter, especially to the crowds that have been here already hours before the official event kicks off in around 90 minutes time. Now the highlight of the event will be, of course, the Bosingak bell ringing, which will be struck by Seoul Mayor Park Won-soon, other officials, and 11 local citizens. So don't miss the big event. We will also have music performances, a light show, and even a special selfie picture time. So don't miss it. Catch it live on Arirang, or if you have time, join me here outside. Now, this has been Kwon So-ah reporting live from Bosingak Pavilion, Seoul.
Well, as you just saw in a flash, we picked out this past year's 10 most defining moments or issues that we spent a lot of time reporting on right here on Primetime News.
Exactly. We are going to talk about one by one tonight, and our trusted reporters of Arirang TV stayed very close to our stories out in the field in 2014, and we picked two of them. Jiwon to my left and Sanghi to my right are joining us to recap what 2014 was like for us and the media. Welcome. Happy New Year, guys.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So I'm sure there's a lot of issues that really stood out to you, but what would you say were the most important?
For me, I think the inter-Korean family reunions back in February was the most memorable event. I got to travel with the families to Mount Kumgang in North Korea, and it was really touching and heartbreaking at the same time to see the families get together. And it sort of made me realize the importance of reunification.
Sure. What about you?
Well, with me, it was obviously the visit by the Pope to South Korea in August. That was when Korea was still in deep sorrow over the tragic Sewol ferry disaster, and it was so comforting to see his big heart towards the suffering in the nation.
Exactly. And like you just mentioned, the April ferry disaster was without a doubt one of the most defining moment, at least for Korea. This disaster, of course, took the lives of some 300 people back in April.
Right. So let's take a look at this next report to get a recap of the tragedy.
It's a tragedy that will never be forgotten in Korea. On April 16, 2014, the Sewol ferry carrying 476 people, many of them students on a school field trip, capsizes in waters off Korea's southwestern coast. Only 172 people survive. The morning quickly turns to anger, first for the captain and crew of the ferry for abandoning ship.
The vessel started listing when I quickly went to my bedroom after giving directions, not when I was steering the rudder.
It would later be determined that the students who perished stayed where they were on the ferry, following instructions given to them over loudspeakers. An early investigation concludes that this Sewol was overloaded and that much of the cargo was not secured properly, which contributed to the sinking. The Incheon District Prosecutor's Office turns its attention to the de facto owner of this Sewol ferry, Yu Byung-un, and his Changhae-jin Marine Company. Police launch a manhunt to find Mr. Yu on charges of embezzlement and tax evasion. But he's found dead, badly decomposed in a plum field in the southwestern city of Suncheon in July. It's never determined what killed him, adding to the mystery and leaving questions about his role in the Sewol tragedy. Months later, ferry captain Lee Jun-suk is sentenced to 36 years in prison on charges of negligence.
It's hard to bear. Do you think 36 years in prison is enough for someone who escaped from the vessel, knowing that 304 people on board were going to drown and die?
The families of the victims demand an investigation into the causes of the accident. However, the National Assembly gets locked up in disagreements over the details of the bill, and the process drags on for months. After months of discussion, debates, and public protests, the Sewol ferry bill is passed in November, launching a special investigative committee that will look into the cause of the disaster. Another gives the government more authority to go after and confiscate illegally obtained wealth by individuals or companies. 8 months have now passed since the accident. Search operations have since been ended, with 9 passengers still missing and an official death toll of 295.
So this ferry disaster, I mean, without a doubt, it affected Korea and Koreans in so many different ways, emotionally, politically, right?
Yes, the sadness and anger still remains in the nation, of course, and domestic consumption was negatively affected, and most cultural events were canceled, of course, especially in the first half of this year. Well, the political bickering over the responsibility of the disaster followed the disaster for months. And one of the major changes in the wake of the tragic disaster was the dissolution of the Coast Guard, since it was harshly criticized for its poor response to the sinking. And a new ministry in charge of safety was set up in mid-November.
I remember reporting from the site of the accident, and it was so tragic I can't even put it into words. But unfortunately, that wasn't the only accident that occurred across the country this year. We had a roof collapse in Gyeongju back in February, where about 10 college students had died.
Yes, a series, and that was not the only one. The series of subway and train-related accidents occurred during the year. And of course, in October, there was the shocking ventilation grate collapse in Pango, where more than a dozen people just plunged to their death while innocently watching a K-pop concert. So I guess year 2014 turned out to be a year that Korea's safety records and standards received a lot of attention, opening up dialogue on how to improve the nation's safety regulations, procedure, and education.
And right when the country was at this emotional lull from all this tragedy, we did have this bright spot where the Pope visited Korea and made a very significant trip to Asia.
Right, that was a great moment because Holy Father visited Korea for 5 days as his first papal visit to Asia. Well, despite his extremely busy schedules, he met some bereaved family members of the ferry disaster, and one father even baptized by Pontiff himself, which is extremely rare case. And his humble gestures were hailed so much by the Korean media, they'd even coined a term, Francis syndrome, to refer to his popularity in the nation. Personally, I was deeply touched as I covered the Pope's first public mass in Daejeon, which he wrapped up with a special prayer for Koreans. He prayed that through the tragedy, Koreans could confirm their commitment to work together for the common good in solidarity. And I truly wish that his prayers could come true in the new year.
I'm sure that's many Koreans' New Year hope, wish, I guess. But another area that certainly needs a breakthrough or some kind of a different headline for a change is certainly North Korea. And this is where you come in, Sung-hee, obviously. And as our very trusted unification ministry correspondent, what is the biggest North Korean news story for 2014?
Well, I think it would have to be the high-level visit to South Korea by 3 of Kim Jong-un's closest aides, including Choi Ryong-hae, who is, of course, widely regarded as the second in power in the regime. The visit also came at a time when North Korea had been sitting on South Korea's offer for talks for 2 months, and it was seen as a possible breakthrough because the trio agreed to a second round of high-level talks when they met with senior South Korean officials, but that momentum was very short-lived as North Korea scrapped the plans after becoming infuriated with anti-Pyongyang leaflet launches by South Korean activists.
All right, so we did see North Korea move on several issues to reduce some of its diplomatic isolation, which were viewed as a positive sign. But on the other hand, it really came under fire heavily this year for its human rights abuses.
Indeed, North Korea opened talks with Japan on the abductee issue. It released American detainees. It also sent high-level officials to Russia a number of times, I believe 3 or 4 times this year. But all these efforts hit hurdles with fresh international attention on its human rights situation. Now, the issue was listed on the UN Security Council's agenda last week following a landmark UN report earlier this year. Now, this report outlines widespread human rights abuses in the North and recommends that the Security Council refer the regime to the International Criminal Court. Such referral is highly unlikely, though, considering China's veto power, but it is a huge move since the Security Council can always bring up the issue whenever it wants to.
And Seoul in North Korea seems to have dug itself into a deeper hole with its cyber attack on Sony Pictures, although new reports are coming in that it might not have been North Korea to begin with.
I know, but still the U.S. government is sticking to the FBI's original findings. And President Obama has vowed proportional response, that he would review putting North Korea back onto the state sponsors of terrorism. So this, of course, was after Sony said it was canceling the release of the movie The Interview after a cyber attack on its corporate network and threats against potential moviegoers. And since then, we have seen disruptions in North Korea's internet connection, which Pyongyang is blaming Washington for. So it seems that this comedy film has started up a fresh cyber warfare between the two longtime foes, and there is this fresh tensions between them.
So looking forward to 2015, what kind of North Korea are we looking at? Are we looking at more isolation, more provocation, or making nice for a change?
Well, Cherry, when things don't go its way with the U.S., North Korea tends to turn to South Korea. It has a chance to do so this time as well, considering South Korea's latest proposal for talks that it made earlier this week. This also comes ahead of Kim Jong-un's New Year's Day speech, where many analysts expect Kim Jong-un to introduce a fresh South Korea policies aimed at improving inter-Korean ties. And both Koreas will also be looking to make some progress in their relations next year, which marks the 70th anniversary of its independence, 70th year of the division of the Korean Peninsula. But then again, North Korea has been denouncing President Park and her North Korea policy for the last 2 days. So we still need to wait and see. And you also have to remember that when it finds itself cornered, North Korea can always launch another provocation. And analysts say a long-range rocket launch is highly, highly likely next year.
Exactly. So that's certainly a variable that we are always watching, actually, not only in 2015, but another variable in the Northeast Asian diplomacy is certainly Japan.
Well, yes, of course. I think the issue of the so-called comfort women, or the victims of the Japanese wartime sexual enslavement, was the thorniest issue between South Korea and Japan this year. And for that, let's first take a look at this report on the latest developments.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's attitude toward the issue of wartime sexual slavery has badly fractured ties between Seoul and Tokyo this year. Abe was pressured into issuing an apology after first denying there was evidence of sex slavery in Japan's imperial past.
The world is denouncing Japan for recruiting wartime sex slaves, which is not true.
In 1993, Japan apologized for forcing thousands of women into army brothels through the landmark Kono Statement. But conservatives in Japan want the Japanese government to reconsider that apology, a move that sparked anger in Korea and China. Throughout the year, the Japanese government and media have stepped up efforts to deny Japan's sexual enslavement of women. In June, Tokyo published a review of the Kono Statement, after which the Asahi Shimbun newspaper admitted that its stories on the victims carried errors. In October, Tokyo even asked the UN to modify its special 1996 report on the victims of sexual slavery. In response to Tokyo's maneuvers, Korea has repeatedly asked Japan to take responsibility for its wartime atrocities by issuing an apology and offering enough compensation to satisfy the victims.
지금 이제 생존해 있는 피해자분들이 한 54분, 그리고 또 평균 연령이 88세, 상당히 고령입니다. 그래서 이분들이 생존에 있을 때 명예를 회복해 드릴 수 있는 그런 납득할 만한 그 조치가 좀 있기를 기대를 하고 있습니다.
So this issue of the comfort women has really blocked summit between the two leaders. What do you think the prospects are this year?
Well, Sean, next year marks the 50th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic ties between Seoul and Tokyo. And President Park has said that she is willing to talk with Abe if he shows some sincerity on the issue. But then again, we have to remember that Abe is onto a fresh term. He will probably introduce more nationalistic, more right-wing policies. He is expected to introduce his so-called Abe statement with these policies. So it really is up to Japan, I think.
Right.
All right, so a lot of work cut out for a lot of us, and let's leave it there. But thank you so much for coming in, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And turning to 2014's economic news, Korea made big strides in 2014 in its campaign to expand free trade deals by wrapping up negotiations with 4 countries.
Exactly, and one of them, the most significant achievement, was the one agreed with China. Let's take a look at this next report.
With the latest edition of a Korea-Vietnam FTA agreed earlier this month, Korea has concluded negotiations with 4 countries this year, starting with Canada in March and followed by China and New Zealand in November. Korea now has 15 FTAs with a total of 52 nations that account for 73% of the world's GDP. And the one agreed with China this year, Korea's biggest trading partner, this is expected to help Korea increase its per capita income to $30,000 within the next 3 years from the current $20,000. Korea's exports to China currently account for a quarter of its total outbound shipments, and a government think tank expects the FTA to expand Korea's GDP by up to 3% over the next decade. The 2 countries have yet to formally sign the deal. The Seoul officials hope to tie up all remaining processes soon, so the FTA go into effect within a year. With China vying to remove tariffs on nearly 2/3 of Korea's manufactured goods within 10 years of implemented free trade deal, Korean industries are busy drawing up new marketing plans for the world's biggest consumer market. Korean makers of machineries, steel, electronics, and cosmetics products are expected to benefit most from the tariff reduction, while textile, rubber, and plastic will have to cope with the influx of cheap Chinese products. Major agricultural products sensitive for Korean farmers were excluded from the deal. Seoul's goal now is to ink a trilateral deal with China and Japan, now entering a 3rd year of negotiations, looking for terms similar to those in the Korea-China FTA.
So now let's talk more about Korea's free trade agreement initiatives, as well as some other economic issues that top headlines in 2014. Professor Shin Sang-hyup is joining us tonight. Thanks so much for joining us on New Year's.
Well, thank you.
Happy New Year. So what kind of meaning or how much weight do you give to this free trade agreement deal with China?
Well, it's very, very important. Actually, I think we have to think about the current economic relationship between two countries. The current trade volume between two countries is about $200 billion, and the Korea's accumulated investment volume into China is about $60 billion. And about the 20,000 Korean companies are operating in China, and then about half Koreans are working or living in China. So the current economic ties between two countries are very, very strong. And then owing to the Korea-China FTA, well, it is in a world that the current economic relations between two countries can be strengthened further in the future. So we can say that the Korea got some stepping stone in the Chinese market, which is really, really huge one. So we can get some momentum for the future economic development. So it's very, very important.
So it certainly seems like it's a huge boon for exports and the future of the Korean economy. But despite some of these advances in trade deals and growth rates that other countries still envy, Korea's economy sure doesn't feel too hot for the average real person.
Exactly. In fact, the figures point to lower consumer and business sentiment, and government measures to counter the slump have yet to gain traction. Take a look at this next report.
Life is hard. Something must be done about the economy.
There's a limit to the money ordinary people can really use.
I've been working at the market for around 14 years. This year felt like the most difficult year.
There were expectations of an economic recovery at the beginning of the year. But now, the country is grappling with slow growth. April's Sewol ferry disaster dragged down consumer and business confidence, resulting in lower consumption and lower investments. The Consumer Sentiment Index plunged to 105 in May. There were short signs of recovery, but the index dropped for 3 straight months again.
I don't think anybody really expected the effect from Sewol to last this long. But I think we were very unlucky in that it was coupled by some international developments. For example, slowdown in China, slowdown in EU.
The government has responded to those internal and external factors.
Whether it's fiscal or monetary, we need an expansionary policy for the time being.
Dubbed Twenomics, the government's plans included a $40 billion stimulus package and deregulation measures for housing loans. For support, the Bank of Korea cut the key interest rate once in August and again in October. But historically high levels of household debt have been a hindrance to monetary policies, raising concerns of a long-drawn slump.
Okay, if you asked me about 3 months ago, I would say no. But because the situation has gone on for so long, I would say that it is within the realm of possibility right now.
But many analysts say Korea isn't likely to follow the footsteps of Japan that has suffered from decades of lost growth.
There have been positive signs of late, such as low oil prices and the depreciating won.
And some say if private spending increases in the first quarter of next year, the economy might even do better than the government's most recent 2015 growth projection of 3.8%.
Now, key words from this report, low growth, low spending, high household debt, so not a lot of good news out there. And now the Korean government is promising efforts to carry out structural reforms. What's your advice on this front?
Well, to revive the stagnant domestic economy, actually, first of all, government should have to attract more investment, not only from domestic investors, but also the foreign investors. And at the same time, the Korean government should have to make the atmosphere which make the consumers spend more money. I mean, actually, to make this kind of things, the government should have to show, build their credibility in the market. For the last several years, Korean government has lost its credibility in the market. So to restore the credibility of the Korean government or Korean government policy in the market seems to be the most important thing. And then the another one is actually the Korean government should have to make every effort to diversify its export items, products, product items, and as well as the diversify its market. So let me give you an example. You know, Chinese market is changing. Actually, one of the major exporting item, Korean exporting item to China was the intermediate products. But right now, Chinese market is changing. They owing to acquiring new technologies, they are right now producing intermediate items, products by themselves. So we have to make another way to keep our market share in Chinese market. That is, we have to find a way to increase our export of finished products. And on the long-term basis, another one is that the Korean government should have to build a very strong financial foundation. Right now, to revive the depressed domestic market, the Korean government decided to provide more money. That is through the fiscal policy. Because of this one, the Korean budget will be in the red on the short-term basis. It's okay, but on the long-term basis, the Korean government should have prepared to build a very strong financial foundation. Without it, Korean economy cannot keep the momentum in the future.
So all of these measures seem like real heady structural reforms, long-term goals. Really quickly, for 2015, do you think we could get all of these done to have a good outlook for next year, or is next year just going to be a year where we have to ride it out until more growth down the road?
Sean, it's really a difficult question to answer. Well, but we have to consider external situations as well as internal situations. Well, as you know very well, the global economy has been in bad shape for the last several years. Right now, they show very slow recovery, but not very much. Well, particularly the European economy is struggling to overcome the financial crisis. Unemployment rate in Europe is more than 10%. Particularly, youth unemployment rate is more than 20%. So, in other words, the European economy is expected to be in a bad shape. And only another one is actually the Chinese market does not, look very, attractive market for Korean anymore. Because as I explained already, Chinese market is changing. So it's going to be more difficult for the Korean producers to enter into the Chinese market.
Right, a lot of challenges.
Yes,
still
these are the very
negative
factors for the Korean economy. And then if I add one more thing, that is the internal factor. That is that, as I said before, the Korean government has lost its credibility in the market. So without the restoring its credibility in the market, it's going to be very difficult. But one opportunity for the Korean economy is that USA economy show right now a little bit faster recovery than our expectations.
Right, so there's a lot of mixed signs out there. So we really can't tell what's going to happen next year, but it'll be a challenge for sure. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us tonight.
Yeah, same to you.
And lots of global headlines in 2014 that we spent a lot of time talking about right here on Arirang News. And of course, joining us for this recap is none other than Paul Lee. Welcome. Happy New Year.
Oh, thank you very much. Happy New Year, guys.
So, Paul, you've been giving us the latest international news month after month, really bringing us all of the latest global headlines.
And what are some of the stories that really stood out to you?
Well, in terms of international headlines, I can't leave out the crisis in Ukraine, which took us into 2014. And then in the summer, we saw the dramatic rise of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And in the second half, we saw the incredible explosive outbreak of Ebola in West Africa. And finally, rounding out the year, we saw the final chapter of the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. Just truly unprecedented events.
Exactly.
Well, let's start with the Ukraine crisis. Quite some alarming moments when you really consider national sovereignty.
Exactly. I mean, the shocking annexation of Crimea by Russia, and we're seeing worse states in terms of the relations between Russia and the West.
That's right, and also led to this ongoing conflict between the Ukrainian government forces and the pro-Russian rebels in the east. And for more details, let's take a look at this report on these key events.
The year started off with violent and sometimes deadly clashes after clashes between anti-government protesters and authorities, with Kiev's Independence Square the focal point of much of the initial violence. It was then President Viktor Yanukovych's decision to seek closer ties with Russia and abandon a trade agreement with the European Union that caused the unrest and sparked what is now deemed the Ukraine Revolution of 2014 in February. Amid the clashes, Yanukovych is ousted as president and flees the country. Presidential powers are then given to this man, Alexander Turchinov. The protests did not stop, however. Pro-Russia supporters continue their rallies against the new Ukrainian government, and Russia's military started encroaching into Ukraine, occupying strategic sites across the Crimean Peninsula. In March, a referendum on the future of the peninsula showed that at least 95% of voters in Crimea supported a union with Russia. Although the EU and the US condemned the referendum as illegal, it led to Russia's Vladimir Putin formally annexing Crimea. Come May, Petro Poroshenko wins the Ukrainian presidential election. In July, Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 is shot down, presumably by pro-Russian forces over eastern Ukraine. Most of the passengers were Dutch and all the crew members were Malaysian. Fighting continues amid failed ceasefire attempts between the warring sides. Most recently, tensions between Russia and Ukraine flared up again as Kiev voted to abandon its neutral status and took a step toward joining NATO. Although membership is seen unlikely, experts say the latest step will only escalate tensions and worsen Ukraine's deep political crisis.
All right, Paul, let's talk about the Islamic State now.
Sure thing. It's an extremist group that has been around for years, but 2014 is when they gained tremendous power in the Middle East. Exactly. And in this next rundown, we'll see that not only did they shock the world, but they also caught many world leaders off guard.
The Islamic State of Iraq was founded in 2006 when a group of Iraqi insurgents merged with the Mujahideen Shura Council. The group, now calls itself Islamic State, are Sunni extremists who regard those who disagree with their interpretations as infidels. They quickly gained ground in Syria and Iraq, easily defeating poorly trained and poorly equipped Iraqi government forces. In an attempt to slow the expansion of the Islamic Front, U.S.-funded Syrian rebels launched an offensive against IS militants in and around the Syrian city of Aleppo in January of 2014. The international spotlight on IS reached its height after the beheading of American journalist James Foley and intensified with the videotaped beheadings of several more Westerners. According to reports by the UN and Amnesty International, Islamic State is also systematically raping, torturing, and enslaving hundreds of women and girls. The women and girls are given as gifts to fighters and often forced to marry the men. As well as Westerners, Islamic State have also killed tens of thousands of Shiite Muslims, as they believe they don't follow the true meaning of Islam. In October, Islamic State dispatched 10,000 militants from Syria to the Iraqi city of Mosul to try and seize Baghdad, and managed to advance to within 25 kilometers of Baghdad airport. After a series of expansionary moves, the militants currently control large parts of Iraq, Syria, the Sinai Peninsula, and eastern Libya.
And Paul, you and I, we spent a lot of time talking about this global war against the Ebola virus, and we are still fighting it.
That's right. To give you some background information, this disease is based on a hemorrhagic virus, which is highly contagious and is fatal in more than half of its reported cases. And also, we should note that the healthcare workers in West Africa right now, foreign and local, have been the hardest hit proportionally. And though this outbreak has slowed somewhat from the earlier stages, as we see in this next recap, that the threat still lingers.
Ebola is a terrible disease.
We have to extinguish it.
I am declaring a public health emergency of international concern.
An outbreak of Ebola has never been this deadly. The worldwide death toll currently stands at more than 7,500, and it keeps on rising. The number of confirmed cases, 20,000. It all began with the first reported Ebola case in Guinea in December 2013. It then spread quickly into neighboring countries like Libya and Sierra Leone. Ebola begins with simple cold-like symptoms. Soon after, the patient starts to experience chronic abdominal pain, bleeding eyes, vomiting, and diarrhea, and eventually organ failure if treatment doesn't work. The virus is transmitted via direct contact with bodily fluids like blood, sweat, and saliva, and the fatality rate for this particular epidemic reached 70% at one point. Affected countries began screening travelers, and some even banned flights going in and out of West Africa. On the global level, the WHO declared the outbreak as a global health emergency, and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention set its emergency operations center to its highest level. International communities were quick to respond, sending necessary aid and troops. A team of 10 Korean medical volunteers have also flown half across the world to Sierra Leone to take part in containing the disease. And more are ready to be dispatched next year. Efforts to defeat the disease continue. An experimental drug called ZMapp was given to American Ebola patients, and developments on faster diagnostic tests for faster detection of the virus is ongoing. If successful, the disease may be detected within just 15 minutes. Hope is rising that the end could be in sight, though, as the infection rate has slowed in recent weeks.
Yes, we are seeing some early signals of, hope. Cases are stabilizing, but we need to continue to do more to get to zero.
Officials say the international community should avoid issuing more travel bans and other steps that would isolate countries, at least until the virus is completely under control.
Paul, let's now turn to Hong Kong, where we saw back in September protesters really taking to the streets to ensure free and democratic elections.
I mean, it was really astounding to see just so many people, young, old, it doesn't really matter, taking to the streets under the name of democracy, universal suffrage. But then it did turn violent at times.
That's right. The founders did have a peaceful, initiative first of all, but it did turn to violent clashes at the end. And though after more than 2 months, it did come to the protest did have cleaned up. It was said to have posed a real serious threat to the leadership in Beijing, a sight not seen since the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. And so finally, let's take this final rundown of the so-called umbrella revolution.
On September 26th, hundreds of students poured out into the streets of Hong Kong demanding free elections. Britain handed Hong Kong back to China in 1997 in a political deal called One Country, Two Systems. This would guarantee Hong Kong more freedom than is afforded on mainland China, such as being allowed to elect their own leader in 2017. However, China backpedaled. Beijing said Hong Kong could hold the elections, but only if the Chinese government first handpicked all the candidates.
The Hong Kong society, in general, they will adopt an approach of civil disobedience, resisting the government till the government consider to restructure the constitutional reform in the coming days.
Police used pepper spray and tear gas on unarmed protesters. This is where the umbrellas came in, which demonstrators used to protect themselves, thereby the name Umbrella Revolution. Maggie Yang lived in Hong Kong for more than 40 years, and she says she hasn't seen anything like this before here in the city.
This is the biggest protest I have ever seen in Hong Kong for decades, because when we grew up in the 80s, we have nothing like this before. Although it caused some traffic jams and blockage, overall this protest is really peaceful.
The occupation of Hong Kong streets, however, came to an end after 2.5 months of protests, without the Chinese government acceding to any of the protesters' demands. It was most serious challenge to the Chinese government since the 1989 pro-democracy protests in Beijing. And analysts say it showed that those in Hong Kong's post-colonial generation can actively take part in the political process and are willing to raise their voices against what they feel is unfair, even if they know it's going to be a long battle.
And that finally wraps up our look at the biggest international stories for now, well, for this year at least.
The big finale.
Right. Certainly, you've covered a lot of pressing topics and topics that were quite scary. And I understand that you are going to be bringing new life into the world next year.
Yay! Breaking news. Global breaking news.
My wife is 9 months pregnant, that's right. And we're expecting any day now, which is kind of very exciting, but also very terrifying as well. But my New Year's resolution for this year is to definitely be the best father and husband as I can.
Oh, wow. I'm sure you'll do great.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just the one that we can always trust with international news coverage, and of course, in 2015 as well. Right. Okay. So what about you, your resolution?
Well, that resolution is going to be part of the second half of the show. So
I don't
can't
get to hear
reveal
about
right
it?
now. Nope, you can't. You'll have to tune in. You'll have to run home and then tune into the second half of our program.
Okay, well, ask
or
me
smartphone.
for my New Year resolution.
I thought you didn't make or have one.
No, I just came up with one.
Oh, great.
Have a good balance, work out more. You know me, I'm too lazy. Well, yeah, thank you again, Paul, and congratulations on the baby.
Thank you very much.
Happy New Year.
And it's definitely been a pleasure and honor giving you guys the updates every single day for this year, and I hope to give you many more for 2015.
Right, and hopefully the news will be much more uplifting and less chaos-based
hopefully
than we had this year.
All right,
thank you so
Happy
much,
New Year, Paul. And that brings us to the close of the first half of our New Year's special. There's much more fun coming up ahead, actually, right?
Yeah.
So I believe it involves, just a quick teaser here, a quick wardrobe change for Sean Lim.
That's right. We'll be in the same studio, but we're going to be transitioning into more of a party atmosphere, so you don't want to miss it, especially with our first musical guest, a very well-known artist. They've made headlines this year.
Exactly. I saw their preparation process, and it will be a party. So, but then I'm not going to be a part of this party, unfortunately. So that will be it for me this year. I am Kang Chiri. Happy New Year, everyone.
Right, and I'll be back in a few minutes. So go get a snack, but don't go anywhere too far. Bye-bye.